We all remember the shock of the pandemic, right? The lockdowns, the furlough schemes, those daily briefings. But what if I told you the biggest economic hit wasn't that initial massive shock? What if the pandemic left behind this permanent, almost invisible scar on the UK economy? A bill that just keeps showing up year after year. So, what exactly is this hidden cost? Let's get into it.
So here it is, the big number, somewhere between 30 and 40 billion pounds. A deep dive into the macroeconomic data shows this is the annual recurring drag the UK is now facing. You can almost think of it as the nation's economic long COVID, a persistent burden that didn't just vanish when the restrictions were lifted. This isn't a temporary dip, folks. It's a permanent feature of our new economic reality.
Okay, so that's the big question, isn't it? If the crisis is over, where in the world is this massive bill coming from? It's not the one-off costs we all heard about. No, this is something deeper, more structural. To really get it, we need to look beyond the headlines. So let's peel back the layers and see what's actually driving this multi-billion-pound bill.
All right, first thing we need to get straight is a really crucial concept. We are not talking about the furlough scheme or those emergency business loans. Nope. Those were part of the initial shock. What we're digging into here is the structural drag, basically a permanent shortfall that now exists in the UK economy. It's a recurring gap that doesn't just fix itself over time. At the very heart of this problem is something economists call a structural deficit. Now, this isn't just a temporary hole in the budget because of a bad year. It's a permanent gap between what the government brings in through taxes and what it needs to spend, even when the economy is supposedly doing well. It represents a fundamental weakening of the nation's finances.
So, where's the biggest chunk of this annual bill coming from? Well, the first place this structural problem really shows up is in the permanent damage to the UK's public finances. This is by far the single largest contributor to that £30 billion figure.
And here's the number, coming straight from the Office for Budget Responsibility. They calculate that a £27 billion adjustment is needed. And listen, this isn't a one-off payment. Every single year, that £27 billion hole has to be filled. That forces a constant, tough choice between raising taxes and cutting our public services.
So how do we even get here? Well, massive government borrowing during the crisis, to fund things like furloughing, pushed our national debt to over 100% of our entire economy's annual output. We're talking about a level we haven't seen since the aftermath of World War II.
And here is the really crucial part. That mountain of debt isn't free. Just like a mortgage on a house, the government has to pay interest on it. So a bigger debt means bigger annual interest payments. We're talking billions of pounds that are now a permanent, recurring cost in the national budget. But the story doesn't end with government finances. Not at all. There's another huge piece to this puzzle: the human cost. The pandemic left a real scar on the nation's health, and that has now become a major drag on our economy. Let's take a look at our missing workforce.
By early 2023, the Office for National Statistics found that a staggering 1.9 million people in the UK were reporting long COVID symptoms. This isn't just a health crisis anymore. It's an economic event that is actively shrinking our country's ability to produce and to grow. To really wrap your head around that, analysis shows the impact of long COVID on the job market is the same as having 110,000 people permanently off sick. Just think about that for a second. An entire workforce, the size of a large town, is effectively missing from our economy. And that missing workforce? It has a direct, quantifiable cost. The annual economic damage from lost earnings and reduced productivity is estimated to be as high as £8.1 billion. That's another huge piece of our recurring annual bill right there. And to put that number into perspective, the annual economic cost of long COVID is now nearly on par with the cost of stroke in the UK. This shows we're not talking about some minor issue here. We're dealing with a new, major, and permanent economic burden. Okay, now we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Was all this economic damage caused by the virus itself, or was it caused by the government's lockdown policies? The source material tackles this head-on, and the answer, well, it's a fascinating and really complex trade-off. The data is pretty clear. The lockdown strategy did have a higher immediate economic cost. Models showed it led to a GDP drop of around 22%, compared to a predicted 13.5% for a less restrictive mitigation strategy. So yes, the policy choice definitely amplified the initial economic shock. But that is not the whole story.
Because here's the powerful counterpoint. The very same analysis, using the UK Treasury's own methods, calculated that the decision to lock down saved lives valued at a staggering £318 billion. This wasn't just about health, it was about preventing the total collapse of the NHS and a far deeper, more chaotic economic disaster.
So let's pull all of these threads together. We've seen the hole in the public finances, we've seen the cost of the missing workforce. Now let's assemble the final bill and try to understand what this really means for the UK's future. So let's add it all up. First, you've got that £27 billion structural deficit that the OBR identified. Then you add the labor market scarring from long COVID, which is costing us up to £8.1 billion a year. And finally, you throw in the extra billions needed just to service our higher national debt. It all combines to create that persistent £30 to £40 billion annual drag on our economy. So why does any of this matter to you? Well, because this £30 billion bill, it has to be paid year after year after year. That means the tough debate over raising taxes versus cutting public services, it's not going away. To fix this, the report suggests a two-pronged approach. First, we've got to tackle the long-term sickness holding our workforce back. And second, we have to get control of the national debt to make us less vulnerable to the next crisis.
And that leaves us with this final, crucial question. The initial chaos of the pandemic might be over, but its economic echo remains. A £30 billion bill that arrives on the nation's doorstep every single year. The hard choices about how we're going to pay for it, they're really just beginning.